Well, thank you very much. It's been a wonderful time here, and I've been to gatherings like this before when people from different disciplines get together, and usually one thing that is difficult to establish is the language. Because, we have economists, anthropologists, historians, biologists, mathematicians, and so political scientists. And so what I'll try to do, as I go, if you have any questions, any confusing terms, please just interrupt me right away. We kind of used to be rude as economists, So I'm right now at Case Western Reserve University. I'm also affiliated with the Economic Science Institute in California. So when Sergey approached me and he asked me to kind of give this talk, an overview, about behavior in group contests, it actually came to me as, there's really not a good review of this literature. And so I started to put things together, and in the span of basically this couple last weeks, I almost finished writing a survey on this. So pretty much there's going to be a survey following pretty much the same title as I put here. So what I'm going to do here, this is going to be follow-up presentation after what Sergey already presented. I'm going to look not necessarily at theoretical work, but experimental work in the field of group contests. Okay? So motivation, group contests, obviously is a common social phenomena. We are talking about warfare. We're talking about competition between individuals, but obviously as an economist, I'm probably more somewhere in this group when I'm more interested about team incentives within firms, rent-seeking behavior, rank order tournaments, things like that all can be characterized as contests between groups. Now, if you think about a contest between groups, a tournament between groups, there are really two incentives here that emerge. On the one hand, you have an incentive to cooperate with each other within the group cooperation. And on the other hand, because if you cooperate, you may get a prize. You can win a war, you can win a political contest, you can get promotion, whatever is at stake if you cooperate within your team. On the other hand, because you're working as a team, you have an incentive to free ride, basically say let others do the work because your effort, your cooperation is costly. So that's what Sergey was talking about. He's saying collective action problem. Again, some of the pictures today, we are probably more in this Sparta world when we're going to be talking about some violence. But again, this is more of my world. A world of business, a world of economics, a world of more or less money exchange kind of conflicts. Now, let me just give you a brief summary of what Sergey mentioned already, but this is going to be maybe a little bit different model so that we kind of can look at the structure, what are we looking at, and why this is such a complex problem to begin with. So think about two groups, and I'm going to call Group A and Group B. Group A has NA individuals, Group B has NB individuals. I promise there's not going to be too much suffering through these slides. Now, players, they make costly efforts. So each player in Group A, we're going to denote player I, makes a costly effort, and he has a cost of effort. That's a cost function. It can be linear, it can be convex, it can be concave, whatever you desire, and it can be different between individual I's. And so the similar applies for Group B. So, by the way, I'm highlighting in red are the essential parameters that later on will determine what matters in these group contests. Then there is a group performance. And the group performance is that, well, remember in Group A, we have individual 1, 2, 3, 4, NA, right? Up to NA individuals. We have to combine their efforts together to determine how well the group performs. Now, how do we do that? Well, you can do it in many ways. In the theory field, basically these are the most common functions. So you have a perfect substitute, so linear production function. When all of the efforts are put together, we sum them up, and that's going to be how well we perform. Or in the best shot world, we take the best player out of this picture, and we put his effort against the best player in other groups. And here it's the weakest link case when you take the minimum or the worst case scenario. So if you have somebody who is lagging in your group, then he's going to pretty much draw the whole group down. So think about, when you have a team of computer scientists that are working together to write a code, and you have somebody who is just hasn't been providing their part of the code, pretty much you screwed in that case. So really, the weakest link determines the performance of the group. So again, this is going to be another crucial parameter that I'm going to look at. Now, the probability of winning by a contest by a group is going to be defined by this contest success function. So basically, this is my group relatively to my and the other group. So this is this relative contest success function, and this R parameter is another parameter that is going to be really important. If R is equal to 1, then we pretty much have a lottery. So if R is equal to 1, basically, what's the probability that I win is simply going to be a lottery that is proportional to how much my group put effort relatively to the other group efforts. Okay? If R is equal to infinity, then this kind of explodes here. And so what you're going to have, if your group puts an epsilon higher effort than my group, you win with certainty. So we call these auctions, right? So you have that's why it's called an auction contest success function, because in economics, if you have bidders that are bidding for the prize or bidding for an object, if somebody says, I'm going to bid $10, somebody says, I'll bid $10.01, who gets the prize? The one who gave 1 cent more. So even the epsilon more is going to guarantee you the victory. Obviously, that's going to be, these are kind of extreme cases, and there is intermediate cases. Another component that is really important here is the share of the prize. So once your group wins, how do you split the prize within group? So one case, you can simply equally share the prize. So imagine if this alpha A is 1 here, then this constant term is 0 here, forget about it. And so you get a share which is 1 over NA. So if you have certain group numbers, you take the big prize that you won and you split it equally among all the members within the group. On the other extreme, if this alpha is 0, then we get to this case, which everybody gets a share of the prize relatively to their effort. So somebody put a lot of effort during the war, so they get the biggest share of the prize. Somebody put little or free ride, they get nothing. Okay? So that's another parameter. So now we have 5 parameters. We can set up the payoff. And so here I am gonna, I'm not setting up any survival probabilities, things like this, selection problem. Here, as economists, this is something that subjects in my laboratories, in my experiments, this is what they really should care about. Because what I do, what they get at the end is this. They get this payoff, which depends on the probability that their group wins. And if the group wins, they get this share of the prize that depends on this rule and the sum value of the prize. And remember, they always have to pay the cost. Whether they win or lose, because it's an all-pay environment. Whatever the effort you put, it's going to be expended. So this is my expected payoff. And again, it's a standard economic model. You have benefits and you have costs. And so the way that you can do now, you could simply set up and solve this problem. You can maximize this payoff for all the number of parameters, all the number of agents, and try to solve it. It's really difficult. Okay, really extremely difficult because of the number of parameters that I showed you. Okay, so nobody has really solved this problem. You can fix one here and one here parameter and then maybe change some other things, but really it's such a difficult problem that maybe the only reasonable way, theoretical way to approach this right now is a simulation. And that's exactly what Sergey was doing. He was just having, if I were to solve this analytically, this would take me many years and I would not be able to do this. So just not at this stage, it's just not worth trying problem. But anyway, so the equilibrium will depend, or the expected equilibrium effort, how much effort should contestants in these groups put forth, will depend on these parameters. So we already mentioned them. Those are the red highlighted parameters. The group size, sharing rule, group performance technology, contest success function, and heterogeneity of players. So these are the crucial parameters that should determine individual behavior in contests between groups. Again, the model that we described here has these following assumptions. This is really important because this theoretical model, because if one of these assumptions is violated, obviously we're going to have a problem. So first, we assume there is a perfect self-interest. So basically, when in these contests, people care only about this. That's what I care about. My payoff, how much money I'm going to get at the end of the day if I win this war, okay, or win this contest. So people are perfectly self-interest. They're fully rational. So I cannot, this is obviously, you'll right away see there is a problem under these assumptions. I'm fully rational, so I can solve that problem. And I assume also correct beliefs about other behavior that everybody else can solve this problem. So all the mathematicians right now in the world, economists, and everybody else cannot solve the problem, but we assume that everybody, lay students and people can easily solve this problem. So you right away see the problem and kind of hypocrisy in the setup of this environment. And the risk neutrality, that's kind of an easier assumption here. So that's why when you look at this theoretically, you're like, oh man, when you try to do this, and I've done some theoretical work, I probably have 5 or 6 papers that look at similar kind of problems, and you just, you tweak one thing at a time and you're happy if you get something, And so because this is just a hard problem. And the easier approach is simply look how people behave. You set up these problems. If you set up these kind of games and you look at how people behave in these environments. So how do we do that? Well, we do this as economists, famously done this either in a laboratory experiment or in a field setting. Okay, so how are we going to do this? This is going to be a typical idea of an experiment, and that's pretty much what I'm going to talk for the rest of this talk. Imagine there is a prize, a $100 prize. As an economist, we use money. As a political scientist, you can use something else. What matters for economists, this is the easy way. It's a very easy mean to elicit willingness to fight. You have money at stake. Then you have Group A that competes for this pie, and Group B. So they're going to be competing by simply trying to win this over from Group B. Group B will try to win this over from Group A. How do you do this? By expanding some efforts. These efforts can be either monetary in terms of, you're going to contribute to the pie of money that our group is laying in order to get this prize, and it's going to go against the pile of money that this group is going to be putting together. Or maybe it can be some real effort task where you give them something really annoying to do, and you really don't want to do it, like counting 1 and zeros in the sequences of hundreds, 1 and zeros. Yeah, I tried it myself because I designed these tasks. Or, giving them 2-digit numbers to add. Maybe give them something more meaningful, like stacking the envelopes or things like that. So basically, you don't really want to do this. You would rather have somebody else do it. But again, this is the free rider problem. You on the one hand, you do want to help your group because this looks very lucrative. On the other hand, you would rather have somebody else do it. Okay? So that's a typical experiment. So I'm just going to take as an example one of my papers. You have a treatment manipulations. You're going to have a, let's say, group performance function that is one of those that I mentioned, best shot, weakest link, perfect substitutes. And I'm going to throw here heterogeneity. This was the first paper I've ever written. And I've actually wrote it in probably more than 10 years ago. It's just, the publication process and everything takes a lot of time. But and you can see right away this is a bad paper because I changed so many things at the same time. And when I try to, it turns out that this is very important paper if you think about it. Really, I'll show you some, where the research has been done. Nobody has touched some of these things that I've touched in my first paper. But the problem is it's so complicated. There are so many moving pieces that people are like, we have no idea what's going on here. But let me just show you how this is done. You have some manipulations here and embedded with some heterogeneity. And then what you do, you invite some students. You assign them to sessions. Again, this is all randomization. You do some repeated trials, give them a chance to learn these games. You do a computer kind of game simulation. Again, they're just, and you pay them. You pay them for performance. So you actually pay them money. They actually have something at stake. Because I cannot really induce a war in my lab. That wouldn't go through IRB. So that's the way that I can induce these kind of conflicts in my labs. Okay? So one of the things, I guess, here that is important is that this is as close as economics can get to the natural science. Because what happens here, we have a theoretical model, we set up hypotheses, then we conduct a controlled experiment by manipulating by randomization to test these models. Then to test these hypotheses. Then based on the results, we actually update our models. We come up with a new hypothesis, and we do this process over and over again. Pretty much, how the natural science happens. So this is as close as we can get. And Vernon Smith, who is also a good friend of mine, and he got a Nobel Prize for developing this methodology pretty much that we use up to date. So what do we get? Oh, by the way, this would be one example of a screen that subjects come, they sit at the computer screen, and this is what they will see. You are in group A and you are type 1. You're in group A and you are type 1. So this is me. I get 60 francs, which is this imaginary currency that will actually materialize into actual dollars at the end of the experiment. And I'm trying to compete against this group. I'm in this group. I'm type 1 here. And so you get this information. And here I'm going to decide how much do I want to contribute to my group's effort. Okay? So that's typical experiment. So what are the findings? And I'm not going to talk about this specific experiment. I'm going to overview about a bunch of experiments that have been done. So, so if you think about, again, as I mentioned, you can do a chosen effort study, and that's pretty much like this one. When you actually choose a number, and this number is costly because it's the money that you have to expend. Or, so in that case, that decision can be a binary. So basically, instead of giving them a continuous strategy space, like you can contribute anything from $0 to $20. You can give them, you either contribute all or nothing. Now, these models are kind of important binary as well, because that's where actually we move to political science, and Becky Morton and Tom Palfrey, I know the political science are here, people. So those are the people who done a lot of those kind of studies. When you have voting, right? Your vote is either yes or no. And voting is costly in the sense that you have to take time, and so you cooperate or you do not cooperate. And then if enough people cooperate on your group, your political candidate wins. So that's a kind of a group contest. But mostly I'm going to look at the continuous decision making. So that's actually, you decide, you have tanks, you decide how many tanks you want to send to the battlefield. You have resources, you decide how much of that resources you want to actually expend. Now, you can also do a real effort experiment. Now, one of the famous one, and probably one of the first field studies that have been done, and again, this is a combination of economists and psychologists, but it was an orange picking contest by Irv et al., and I think Gary Bornstein was on this team, and I don't know if I'm on the Rappaport, but some of the people that have done a lot of this work were in this group. They just basically had teams of people competing in picking oranges. Okay, and so what they find is then when you have these parties that are competing, when you introduce between group contests, the productivity goes about 35% up. So by inducing some kind of group competition, they get a lot of productivity going up. And that is better than tournaments, this is better than just simple tournaments or some kind of, pay for performance. So that's their tangential evidence of these tournaments being, these between group contests being very competitive. That's how they get it. They still cannot say anything relatively to theory, but they get some indication. The same thing has been done with the real effort experiments in the laboratory. So you let people decipher some codes, or you get them solve mazes, and pretty much you get the same result. When you introduce between group competition, things really start picking up. People work really hard. Now going back to the theory, so comparing to the theory, now we have these laboratory studies that will set up pretty much the same kind of incentives that I described in those theoretical models. So they will set up those incentives, and what they will find, and they will usually use a very simple setup so that you actually can get some theoretical result. So the theory will predict, group A should do this, everybody in group A should do this, everybody in group B should do this. So you actually have a point prediction from the theory. And what they find is that once you assign people to these contests, instead of doing this, they do like 5 times more. Up to 5 times more. People overexert effort. They waste too much money. Sometimes they waste so much money that they end up owing me money at the end of these experiments. These are very easy and cheap experiments to run because if you don't have great budgets, just do one of these. You're actually going to make money on your students. I mean, that doesn't go through IRB, so you actually give them some endowments at the beginning or opportunities to earn money. But it turns that they compete like crazy. And very little free riding. So this, when you introduce this kind of group competition, you don't have those problems that the theory talks about. Now the question is why, right? So because, and this has been replicated over probably by now 50, 60 studies. So the question why? Well, you can go into natural selection, you can go into, between group conflicts, but I think we have to actually take a first step back and say, well, what happens if you have an individual going against the individual in a contest? Forget about groups yet. Just have an individual versus an individual going against each other in the contest. You pretty much find very similar results. When people forget about groups, when individuals against each other go into these kind of competitions, they compete like crazy. Again, you make money on them. Some explanations, why would you compete more than what the theory predicts against the other opponent? So one will be, well, people care about winning, not just the monetary outcomes, but there's something that triggered in me when I compete against my opponent. I've done one of the first experiments that I ran, got published 5 years later, but it was actually, I asked my students to bid for zero, to compete for zero. Two people are facing each other, they have some money, and the only thing they're going to know, I'll declare somebody a winner. No prize involved, nothing. 50% of people bid for zero. And they spend quite a substantial amount of money. This is just crazy, and probably one of the reasons why the paper got published, because this is such an insane result. Why would you bid for zero? So there is this indication that people care for winning. So that should go, from theory to behavior maybe over here. But we're still not over there. 5 times, that's a lot. So we are probably over here. Then you can say, well, bounded rationality, people don't have a clue. We have these assumptions that people behave rationally. Obviously, that's a very unrealistic assumption. So when people make mistakes, maybe you can account for that as well. So that helps to add to the explanation power as well. And then you say, well, look, it's not that people just, when they compete in these contests, yes, they care about the pile of money that they're going to bring from the lab at the end of the day, but they also care how much the other guy is going to do. There are famous studies right now that have been shown that, in economics and probably social scientists, in political science, in psychology knew this all the way, 50 years ago. But as economists, we rediscover many results with incentivized, subjects, but pretty much people care about what others do. And so if I care not only about my payoff, but I really would like to have my payoff not less than yours, then now we have 1, 2, and 3. So now we have 3 explanations that probably can explain partly, at least, why people are more competitive than what the theory predicts. Now, this is as far as the individual contests against each other. Now we're moving now to a different world between the contests between groups. So think about the group now incentive. Now, not only I'm competing against the other group, which remember these competition, arousal, they actually cause other things for you in you to compete. So I'm really running out of time. So anyway, so the two explanations here. One is that why do we get even more competition in between group contests? Social identity, theory, and parochial altruism. So basically that's you love to help your in-group and you hate the out-group. And so basically that steers up the competition even further. I have time to talk on this. Group size, we've talked about Olson already and his probably famous group size paradox. He said that, look, because we have these incentives to free ride, what will happen, the larger group will be less likely to win than the smaller group under certain conditions. And the reason is, smaller group, it's easier to coordinate, less free riding, and at the end of the day, they can actually outperform the larger group. And so there's been a number of studies that have tried to do this. Again, NA, that's one of those parameters that we're trying to look at. What's the conclusion from this literature? Larger groups are more likely to win, disregarding the theoretical predictions. No matter how they try to twist, what happens at the end of the day, larger groups pretty much always wins. Okay, that's the first thing that besides this large over expenditure, where people compete too much, this is the second result that I want for you to remember from the literature. Again, number of studies have documented that. Sharing rule. So we have egalitarian versus proportional sharing rule. So most of the experiments will use egalitarian or equal split rule, so everybody in the contest gets the same share of the prize. And there are some studies that actually compare the two rules. What are the conclusions? Individual efforts are higher when members of the group are rewarded proportionally instead of equally, which makes sense. Again, this result stands pretty much against, even when the theory predicts otherwise. So that's another result, that when people share the prize proportionally, instead of giving this prize equally to everybody, they compete way more in these group contests. Group performance technologies. So we have these 3 group performance technologies. It turns out that effort that the individuals submit in these contests crucially depends on this group performance. Crucially depends. So if you have a weakest link case, which is over here, you get pretty much no free riding, because you know that even the weakest link has to do something. So you get no free riding. If you have a best shot, not surprisingly, it's always the strong players that have to put the effort in the best shot. And weakest players always free ride. So which makes sense. Again, these are the results that kind of very, very intuitive. But anyway, so we find that this is really important in determining group performance. Contest success function. So now I'm moving from a lottery to an auction. So basically what this R parameter does, it makes a competition more stiff or less stiff. And it turns out that the auction CSF, or basically this more stiffening the competition by making it more rigid, more discrete, it turns out that it actually leads people to compete more. So again, another result. This would be, I would caution this result, because pretty much it comes from the contest between individuals, because there has nothing done in contest between groups. But anyway, I believe that this result will be replicated with groups as well. There's an avenue for future research. Finally, heterogeneity. There is really one study, and again, that's what I said at the beginning. That's a bad paper, but unfortunately, actually, nobody has. It deterred maybe other people from writing the papers on this. But I know that Sergey is going to do the experiment. They're going to run one in Oxford that actually uses very similar design, but will be a much better paper. And I know that Thomas Palfrey has some papers in political science that actually pretty much look at similar problems, but I still have to incorporate that, how it makes sense in the group contest. Anyway, so what we find is that obviously heterogeneity matters a lot. To different extents, strong players and weak players behave differently. One thing that that usually strong players put more effort than the weak players. So that's one observation, that strong players, doesn't matter what the theory predicts, strong players most of the time put more effort than the weak players, which sometimes makes them make lower payoffs. So they actually earn less at the end of the day because they have more incentives to put effort, which again, we heard about that today. So I don't have time to that. There's been studies that have been looking at what are the factors that can promote cooperation within groups. Things like, punishment within group communication, creating virtual competition, feedback, leadership. All of these factors can promote within group cooperation. And there's been some factors that have been investigated how to promote between group cooperation. Okay, instead of just within group, between group. Some studies have looked at alliances, alliance formation, sorting into groups, group survivals. But basically, this is the general findings that I want for you to take. These are the take-home messages. Most findings, and by that I mean like 99.9%, find this significant over expenditure. People compete, if you set up these group contests, people compete way too much than any reasonable theoretical model would predict. There are some explanations that can be, again, harvested in this environment. Other findings, larger groups are more likely to win than smaller groups, disregarding what the theory will say. Individual efforts are higher when members of groups are rewarded proportionally. Effort crucially depends on group performance. When you stiffen the competition, people compete more. And finally, heterogeneity really matters, really matters. So these are just the take-home messages from this literature. I think that'll be it. I went over time, so thank you.
Thank you very much. We have time for some questions.
Fantastic talk. Joanna Bryson, I will be mailing you and asking you for the slides because obviously you went way fast through some stuff I really care about. But this is a chance to ask a question I wanted to ask at Wrangham's because I'm most interested of the three because I know the least about it, about this sort of the non-monetary, the excitement that the dominant chimps have. Mm-hmm. And when he was talking about it, I was thinking, well, maybe there's a proximate cause, which is that you actually get a thrill from winning.
Yes.
Right? And the dominants have a higher expectation of that than the subordinates in the case of the chimps. So I don't know. But this is like, well, okay, this is like sex, right? Sex doesn't do well for you. It does well for your children, right? But you enjoy it a lot. Mm-hmm. And so hopefully, anyway, so the point is that this seems to be something that is a group level adaptation, right? If you're talking about something where you're looking for a competition, it's not that it's necessarily in your favor. Is this like taboo to talk about this when we know that we're
I am writing, I'm on the way back to this conference, I was reading the book on the airplane called A Big Prize, which is a very unknown book. You don't have to read it. But basically it argues the same thing. What are the negative consequences of this competitive behavior? And when I gave this talk at Bonn, different talk, but on the competitiveness, people pointed out this is really not consistent with any evolutionary theory. Why would you bid for zero? This is stupid, and then they, I had to give a big defense that actually you can't explain, but we can talk about that. I mean, this is a taboo, but this is a taboo that I'm willing to challenge as well.